As Attackin Psyche years ago, there was a 7-year-old kid sent to the floor because his mom didn't know what to do with him. Sadly, common thing to happen even if the kids don't have psych issues. Anyway, the mom was shaking and crying, and they had to take the kid into another room. She was genuinely afraid of her own son. She had suspected something was wrong when she kept finding mutilated animals in the backyard, but never heard or saw coyotes or anything around. The neighbor's smaller pets started disappearing. The boy had an obsession with knives, hiding them around the house, denying anything when the mom confronted him. Then, when the two started getting into arguments, he would get really violent and hit her, push her down and kick her, threaten to kill her. On multiple occasions, she woke up in the middle of the night with him standing beside her bed, staring her in the face. She put extra locks on her bedroom door to feel safe while she slept. The last straw was when she lifted up his mattress and found more than 50 knives of all shapes and sizes under there. So she brought him to us. I remember talking to him, treating him like he was just another kid that came through. He seemed remarkably normal until you spoke directly to him. He had this way of looking right through you, or maybe like he didn't see you at all while you were speaking. He would respond like a robot, like he was just saying words because that's what we wanted to hear. And he would always put on this creepy, dead-looking smile, like all mouth and no eye involvement in the smile, especially when he would get away with something, like taking another kid's markers and they couldn't figure it out. Still gives me chills laying here thinking about him. I had to get up and close my bedroom door. I believe I met a 7-year-old psychopath. A 13-year-old boy came in for a routine checkup and vaccines. He was already acting like an angsty teenager, giving only one-word answers at first and pouting while his mother was in the room. At his age, I asked parents to step out of the room to ask personal questions about sex, drugs, tobacco, alcohol, etc. He answered no to everything, but after I asked, "Is there anything you want to ask me before I have mom come in?" his tone changed. He started to tear up and shudder and talk about seeing bloody shadows in his periphery and that he had been hearing voices for 4 years. He always thought it was literally his subconscious and everyone could physically hear their own voices. He only started to worry recently when his best friend died in a car wreck, and now the voices were yelling at him that he's stupid. It's his fault. Kill yourself. And then he said they were telling him to kill me. They've been telling him to kill others for weeks. I didn't freak out, but I was thinking I could not believe what I was hearing. I had a psych team see him immediately, and he was brought to a psych ward. The mother was shocked and had no idea. I saw him 2 months later, and he was a completely different kid. Sarcastic as shit, but funny and interactive and happy. It was like night and day after some Ripper doll. For whatever reason, this creeped me out the most because I don't normally deal with psych. I've seen lots of postmortem stuff dealing with trauma, so I've been desensitized to lots of things, but this event was the most surreal thing to me, mainly because it was so unexpected. On a medical school rotation in psychiatry, I rotated at a hospital which is essentially a full-time psych ward for folks who have pleaded insanity or ended up in an acute psych hospital and were eventually transferred here because they could not become well enough to go home. The place was actually very nice. It was nothing like you see on TV. It was essentially like a college dorm with 6 or 8 wings total. Each wing had 16 rooms and each wing was broken down by gender. Each wing also had a gated outdoor area and a gym area so that the patients had a relatively good life, considering. I met many patients with crazy stories, but one always will stand out. This young guy, about 25 years old, was there. He had had these delusions just after college about some girl he had had a crush on his freshman year of college. She wrote for a popular magazine, and he supposedly had these delusions that she was writing about him to make fun of him. He hunted her down in her hometown, raped her, and tried to kill her, but she escaped. He then pled insanity and was placed here. I went up and talked to him as a little third-year med student. I started asking about his delusions and whatnot. It turns out his father was high up in an international corporation and worth millions. The kid, who was hauntingly normal on the surface and incredibly creepy once you started digging, told me that he basically pled insanity only because his lawyer said to. He never had delusions, never had hallucinations, nothing. He basically thought the girl was hot in college, drove 400 miles to rape her, then freaked out. But his lawyers advised that he plead guilty because as a soft, upper-class kid, he'd do much better in the psych hospital than in prison. So there he was. Luckily, he'll likely spend longer in there than he would have in prison, because generally that's how it works. But he seriously creeped me the fuck out. I work as a psychotherapist in a hospital system. My definition of creepy is probably quite a bit different from other medical professionals. The one that got to me the worst was a patient who came to us after attempting suicide by sawing off both his arms off at the forearm with a table saw. His arms were reattached fairly successfully too, which only limited impairments in mobility. All I could think of was how bad it would have to be to live in his head that sawing his arms off seemed better than that. He has since completed suicide. Edit. A table saw is a saw mounted in a table that stays on once turned on. All you have to do is run things into the saw to cut them. This is how he could cut both arms off. Also, suffice it to say that if you are in a state of mind that finds cutting your arms off to kill yourself or to relieve psychological pain, you are not in the state of mind to determine the most efficient way to kill yourself. I work in an ER, and due to my country and state's poor mental health system, we see acute psychotic episodes daily. Over time, you get desensitized to it, but there is still one that turns my stomach. A guy was found in a burning abandoned building. He wasn't hurt, but was acting so strange the paramedics brought him in. He was homeless, had no ID, did not know his name, and had 0 drugs in his system. Looking into his eyes, you could tell he wasn't seeing the same thing I was. So I'm trying to get his name or anything out of him, and he keeps telling me he was a pilot for the Air Force and flew experimental airplanes, because he could withstand the G-force and his blood was naturally thin. The blood tests that measure this actually were fairly higher than normal, but not elevated to the point he was on medication for it, so he was right on that account. I was at the desk telling a coworker about the stuff this guy was saying when a resident overheard me. He was former Air Force as well, and looked like he had seen a ghost. As soon as I mentioned the name of the base, this doctor freaked out. He said that the city/base has no roads in or out, and a lot of top secret testing goes down there. He said that you don't know about it unless you've been there. He told me not to talk about it or make a big deal. This gave me an even weirder vibe. To be honest, just about any time you have to cut someone off, it gets crazy or weird. People just don't get it. I don't want to cut them off because I probably won't get a tip, and that also means I can't sell you more alcohol. Most recently, this guy who must have been in his 70s kept buying drinks for girls at the bar. What made it weird is that he would buy a guy's girlfriend a drink and tell the guy he could buy his own. He became aggressive about it after a while, and I cut him off. He insisted on seeing the top manager. I told him I was a bar manager, but he wouldn't accept that. I called over the assistant manager, who is not my boss. To appease him, he proceeded to tell him that he had to pay his tab now or we would just call the police. The guy then said he would only pay for the drinks that he had, $20 of the $80 tab, until we once again informed him that we have a very good relationship with the local police, and it would be in his best interest to just pay and leave. He paid, looked at me and said, "Here's a tip, $20, and said, "I'm not an asshole like you." I offered to call him a cab, and he said, "Fuck off," and left. One girl who had been alone at the bar and sat next to him called the next day saying that she thought she had been drugged. This is just one example. A non-service industry person could not imagine the shit we have to put up with. I agree most of us are just big babies, but many of us have seen some shit. When I was 16, I had a fake ID and decided to go to a gay bar by myself because some friends bailed on me. While there, an older gentleman bought me a drink. He wasn't a creeper and he definitely wasn't unattractive. I accepted the drink and began talking to him. No big deal. As the hour progressed, I felt myself feeling strange. I mentioned that I felt like I had a headache and this guy helped guide me out of the bar. As we were walking down the street, the thought of, "Oh God, he's drugged me, I'm going to die," came to my head. I tried to get away, but I was so drugged up that I could barely walk, let alone speak. It also didn't help that I had really large goth platform shoes because I was going through a phase. Anyway, this guy brought me to his SUV and began undressing me. As a final act of defiance, I hit him over the head with my platform shoe. He then punched me, and I remember thinking, why don't they ever give workshops to gay guys about being victims of rape too? While I was as careful as possible, I never saw the guy slip something into the drink. I even watched the bartender make the drink. Anyway, I lied there completely paralyzed while this pervert was lubing up. I locked eyes with his for a moment, and that's when it happened. A very large and angry drag queen opened the door of the vehicle and beat the shit out of my attempted rapist. She and her other drag friends helped dress and care for me while the police arrived. I was saved by a group of guardian drag queens. They were basically the modern-day angels from heaven. Back in the day, I was a bartender at a popular bar just off the campus of a large university. Most of our patrons were college grad students or professors, a few blue-collar regulars. Overall, a fun place to work, and I really liked the patrons. But the creepy random drunk guys, I'm a girl, were not fun. As a pretty young female bartender, you realistically know you'll have guys hitting on you. I took it in stride, and could easily sidestep the "do you have a boyfriend" questions without upsetting or leading the guys on. But this one guy that came in, I'd never seen him before. Average-looking dude, maybe early 30s, came in sober and the bar wasn't busy yet. We chatted about various things, sports, Jeopardy. It was on TV at the time because early evening, school, etc. Didn't get a creepy vibe from him. Several hours later, however, he was getting pissed that I had to serve lots of other patrons. Obviously gets busier the later it gets on a Friday. So then while I had a short downtime, and I was standing behind the bar washing glasses, he asks me the question, did I have a boyfriend? I thought for a few seconds on how to answer the best way with this particular guy. I told him that no, I didn't have a boyfriend, I had 2 boyfriends. Very matter-of-factly. He laughed and really seemed to like the answer. He was like, nice. Usually my tactic was to be one of the guys with regular male patrons. However, an hour later, the same guy very belligerently demanded my phone number. Obviously, nope. He started yelling things like slut, whore, bitch, etc. at me, and the bouncer gave me the "do you need me" look. I waved him off at the time, thinking I could easily handle this guy. I was very, very wrong. Within the next 30 seconds, I hadn't even cut him off yet. He quickly jumped on top of and over the bar in order to put his hands around my neck. Another patron yelled for the bouncer at the same time he himself jumped over to tackle the creeper. The entire bar just erupted, wanting to beat the shit out of this guy. The bouncer got him out safely and called the cops. Yes, it put a damper on my night. I watched a lot of PSA videos about how important it is to make sure that drunk people aren't taken advantage of. It paid off last weekend, but I'm kind of shell-shocked to see such a situation firsthand. I prevented a guy from separating a very drunk girl from her friends. The guy was pulling her away from her friends and trying to convince her to go back to his place with him. He was very aggressive and was ignoring the significant language barrier between them. Her English wasn't good. He was sober. She was drunk and confused. I saw that she was very confused and was protesting his attempts to take her away from the bar. So I stepped in and asked if she was okay, spoke in a common language, gave her a hug since she wanted a hug, and told the aggressive guy that I was her friend. The look of disappointment and disgust on his face, I guess I just cock-blocked him, oh God, made me sick to my stomach. I realized beyond a doubt that he didn't have her best interests at heart. Once I separated her from him, she kept hugging me and started crying because she couldn't find her friends. She was really upset that the guy was trying to take her to his place, but she wasn't able to say no easily and she was scared. She wasn't steady on her feet, which was worrying. Once my male friends saw that there was a situation at hand, they sprung into action to make sure that we could find her companions. We eventually located her pals, just outside the bar with one of their friends who had way too much and was tossing his noodles, and they were able to get her home safely. She was really intent on giving me her phone number, so I was able to text her in the morning and follow up. I'm happy to say that she is fine now. She even wants to go to a party together sometime. I'm still really stunned because I haven't experienced a situation like that before. It's good that I was able to help her, but even better that my male friends saw how important it was to look for that kind of situation. Once they realized something was going on, they immediately got involved, steadying her, helping her group get a taxi. But her distress didn't even register on their radar at first. Not noticing it really shocked them. So everyone, please take a look around your surroundings as you leave a bar or club. It doesn't cost much to get a drunk person a taxi. 10 minutes out of your day to ensure someone is alright isn't much of an inconvenience. You might really help somebody and may even prevent a crime. There are human predators who lurk outside bars to try to take advantage of inebriated people, and that's just awful. We have to watch out for each other. I hope that sharing my experience will help others remember to keep an eye out for drunk people who could use a hand. I was in a really screwed up place as a teenager. Nerdy was in my genes. My brother and I were those child prodigies who couldn't seem to connect with people. Fat was in my genes too. I was just that side of chubby where people don't feel bad for saying it. Already, I was at a huge disadvantage for the atmosphere of a small town high school. I was sexually abused as a kid and had PTSD from it, and depression was starting to come in too. When I hit high school, we got a new band teacher. He was young and cute. The best part was, he was nice to me. He was never anything but professional. If he had to give a lesson to a female student, he made sure more than one was there. He never got more than 3 feet close to someone. But being lonely and looking desperately for a way out of the rut I was living in, I fell in love with the first person to show me kindness. I started following this man around like a puppy. I joined every extracurricular band activity I could. I don't regret that part. I had a crazy fun time in pep band. I could out-scream a team of cheerleaders by myself. But that's a story for another day. I was always the last one to head out, just so I could see his face. I think the only reason he didn't have me removed from band was that I was a good student. I led my section after teaching myself to play baritone, and he called me his logistics girl for all set up and tear down. Unfortunately for the poor guy, I only lived 2 doors up from the high school. When I saw he was working late, I'd go ride my bike in the parking lot, just happening to conveniently be there when he got out. I tried to be truthful. A lot of times I was upset, and I tried to get him to understand that. But I realize now that it was pretty damn transparent. My crush was huge, could probably be seen from space. Now, as a grown-up, I can only imagine how uncomfortable I must have made this man feel. I was so unprofessional, and teachers really had to worry about that. I wonder if I made him feel unsafe. I knew where he lived, but I was never dumb enough to go there. He's since moved to another side of the country, but I still really hate myself for what I did. I can't help but wonder to this day whether I was a factor of making him leave. I mean, I didn't think I was that annoying, But hey, I guess I'll never know just how much I affected him. I worry some days that he'll come back and see me. I want to run up and apologize to him, but I think, realistically, I'll just find the nearest hole to jump into. Don't let the place you're at affect the safety of others. Please. There is this one man I cannot stop thinking about. I met him a year and a half ago. He's an artist, and I look up all the art galleries in this area to see if he is exhibiting his work in any of them. I look up art events he's going to on his social media and go so I can bump into him. I gather information about him without his knowledge. I know his age, where he came from, who his family is, where he went to high school, college, and grad school. I know he was a 4.0 student in college, and I've scoured the internet for everything on him, because he's known in my city as an artist. He's a beautiful human being. He's deep, quiet, totally sexy, starving artist to a T. His voice, his body language, his eyes, blue. His arms are muscular, but not disgustingly buff. It makes me mad. When I do see him, I just get so quiet. I don't know what happens. I'm completely not myself. He affects me so strongly. From 1 to 10, 1 being mild and 10 being very, how stalker am I? Can any of you relate? My life has always been a mess, and then I found her profile on the internet. On the outside, she was a lot like me. Nicknames, birthplace, age, sign, birthday, hobbies, tastes, personality. Except she had everything I wish I had. Everything that made me look for someone who could save me. Then, I realized I had known her before. Everything was coincidental. I was amazed. We exchanged messages. It was okay, but it meant a lot more to me than it did to her. To put it simply, facts about myself reminded me of her, so I kept going back to her. I was young. I stalked because I didn't know what I was doing or how harmful it could be. Before I knew it, it had turned into a habit. The more I stalked, the harder it was to let go. The more I felt like I needed it. Letting go is so difficult, even though I know how much I need it. I've been stuck for all of my teenage years. It has been 4 or 5 years. I can't grow up and let it go, but she did, and this only makes me more jealous. When I'm at a low, I feel like stalking. I need it like a drug. I become depressed if I don't. I've been struggling. When I'm at a high, I may go for months without stalking. This is when I am the most vulnerable, because I forget how much effort I had to make not to stalk her. And then I give in, and I am sucked into the whirlpool again. My mind always goes back to her. I need help. I don't want to give up on me for her, but therapy isn't an option where I live. I know it isn't about her anymore. It's about my issues, and she's the unlucky object of my frustrations. But what to do if my heart forgets this from time to time? I've always been ashamed to admit this, but I feel I need to. I was in year 9. I was about 14 and I started to fall in love with my Spanish teacher. Let's call her Mrs. J. She was really lovely to me before she found out I liked her. I remember once my friend and I both forgot our books. My friend got detention, but Mrs. J just said to me, "Aw, you're so forgetful. Maybe I'll have to make you a little holder for your book and then you will always remember." I think about her all the time, write about her in my wee diaries, and she'd make my heart jolt every time I thought about her. I'm a girl too, and she was my first real intense feeling. Looking back, I wasn't in love. I was infatuated. She had obvious favorites, and she was always nice to me. I remember just wanting her to know how important she was to me, and how much I loved her. I didn't want her to ever forget me, so I thought by going out of my way to be noticed, she'd always remember me. The habit stuck, and I realize now I wish she didn't remember. I wish I didn't tell her. Then we could have kept our nice teacher-student relationship. I ended up telling her about how I felt. Big mistake. We had these Year 13 slaves for a day. You know, just a fundraising kind of thing. You could be like, "Slave, go and hug that guy over there." And they'd do it. It raised money for something. I got my best friend's slave to tell her. She had a very cold response, which was a change from the nice teacher I had. That day in Spanish, she kept away from me and gave me dirty looks. I felt awkward and nervous. I still needed to talk to her in some way, but I was too afraid. So I started to follow her around, seek attention from her with my friends, wait for her in the corridors, watch her, and write her love letters. I'm quite a quirky, jumpy person, so I wasn't very subtle either. I was such a stupid kid. My best friends and I took photos of her once and called her house. That really weirded her out, which was fair enough. I only took one picture that day, but felt so awful and creepy I deleted it right that second and never did anything like it again. I added her daughter on Facebook for some odd reason too. I have honestly no idea why. I think it was a spur of the moment, big mistake. I had no bad intentions. I wouldn't hurt a fly. I was very silly. The actions, although they hurt and I couldn't stop, also became a part of my friendship with my best friend. I remember watching her as I was on the ground, hiding, and she came up to me and said, "What are you doing?" And I didn't know what to say, so I said, looking for spiders." She said, "No, you're harassing me." My friend still reminds me of this stupid looking for spiders excuse now and laughs about it with me, like private jokes. Mrs. J went and stood by the bridge, looking really angry with me. I went up to her and said, "Are you angry at me now, or annoyed?" She replied, "What do you think? I've been annoyed for a long time. I know this is all some joke to you." I almost burst into tears and said it wasn't a joke. She asked me what it was then, and I just stood there scared. She said, in a concerned, almost anxious tone, "I mean what I say. I don't like this. I can't say what you want to hear. It's not right. I'm old enough to be your mom. My husband's all for coming down here and getting you expelled." My heart exploded into a million pieces. Her husband, the one she loves, not me. They'd team up and take me away from all of my friends. She said, "You'll move on. You'll get girlfriends and stuff. You'll forget me." What got to me the most was her saying she didn't even want to leave her classroom in case I was there watching her. That made me feel like a criminal, a creep, a stalker. I was just a kid and so deep. I was so infatuated. She then sent me to the counselor. I could tell she was trying to be nice, just not doing it well. Mrs. J got so sick of it. She'd ignore me and complain about me. She'd see me in the corridors and give me nasty glares. A couple of times I actually burst into tears when she did that. I never went to her house or anything extreme, but I was stalking her around school for a year. It was like I needed to, because I was so hooked on her. I wanted her to talk to me and make it better. My mom emailed her once trying to explain. She said she thinks I'm a lovely girl and she holds no grudges against me. It's just that she's a professional who treats her students equally. By night at home, I'd cry myself to sleep. Every night for a whole year. My eyes were like little puffy cakes. But I can see why Mrs. J thought I was joking. My friends and I found humor in the pain. If only to turn it into something else, to take something good from all the hurting. Once they locked me in her block and guarded the doors just for a laugh. They'd go and I'd chase them. I loved my friends, but secretly I was hurting, whereas they all found it amusing, but still helped me out and felt sorry for me. They were perfect friends. I became incredibly depressed, confused, ashamed, and heartbroken. My letters weren't at all freaky. They were apologetic and sweet, but they were obsessive, you could say. I tried to show her I could stop and be mature, but I kept making mistakes. I started self-harming and I completely changed. Before I was a happy, bubbly kid. But after all of this, I cried myself to sleep, tried suicide, worried constantly, and hated myself. I had a cut across my neck once that she saw. That must have scared her to death. She ended up banning me from various blocks around the school. The head of the school, Mr. M, was horrible. He yelled at me and said I was a stalker, and no one wants to hear my stupid harassment. I was already banned from her block, and I was banned from another block after that too. I sat there crying and crying with my best friend while she tried to make me laugh. It broke my heart to hear my counselor say, "She doesn't want you around. She doesn't want to see you, so you can't go into these areas." My counselor was a lovely woman. She was just trying to help me see that this wasn't going to work. She even wrote me a letter saying how strong I was, which I still have to this day. But when she let out the truth, I was hurting. I know I was wrong, but I felt like a criminal and a victim all in one. I wrote her a really long email, and by long I mean about 15 paragraphs. It was just me venting about how sorry I was and how much I cared for her. From this action, I was banned from everywhere except one room. I was crushed. The school told me that if I stayed in this room for 3 weeks, then I could come back to school and everything would be normal. They lied. I was secretly expelled the whole time. They just didn't want to kick me while I was down. My biggest fear, leaving all of my friends and never seeing Mrs. J again, came true. And for 3 weeks, I didn't even know. My ex-girlfriend came back with me for those 3 to 4 weeks, and I was moving on from Mrs. J and focusing on my girlfriend. But then Mrs. J walked past the only area I was allowed in, and so I ran closer to her, only because I knew I'd never see her again. My girlfriend broke up with me because she thought I loved her, which wasn't true anymore. I threw my girlfriend away, and I still regret that. I adored her, and she made those last few weeks bearable. I ran away from school and wanted to throw myself in front of a car, but I stood there, watching them until some teachers found me. I'd attempt to hang myself after school, put plastic bags over my head, and on the very last day of school, I was so desperate and messed up, I had a breakdown in Mrs. J's block. I was lightly, not loudly crying, and I just felt so confused. I was moving my pen along her office door, and another teacher opened it and had a word with me. I started panicking when she went to close the door because I knew she was closing the door to my last chance of fixing things with this teacher. I lost it. I remember walking into her classroom and seeing her Cardi on the chair and touching it angrily, full of hurt. I was begging for her not to do this to me, although she never saw me. She was in the other room the whole time, but probably heard enough. I needed closure. I was in so much pain. I just went crazy for that moment in her block. I just couldn't handle it anymore. Either way, it was too late. I was asked to leave the school. The thing that messed me up the most is how I heard that she'd sue the school if they didn't kick me out. She said to someone, "What if she hurts my daughter? What if this love turns to hate and she turns on me or my family?" That has never left me. I wouldn't hurt anyone. I'm not a psycho. I was a 14-year-old girl and I didn't understand my feelings. I didn't know how to handle them. I'd never let it go this far again. I was learning. Looking back, it was like I was just a newborn into the whole crushes and feelings thing. I don't understand how she didn't understand. She was a kid once too. I'd never hurt her. Knowing that she sees me as some scary stalker has stuck with me 3 years and I still cry about it now. I wish she never said that because I'll never get over it. I've never been the same since. It was odd because later down the year, I think I just got so used to the unrequited love, I didn't know how to let it go, even though my heart could have. If it repeated now, I could walk away and not do these things. I've had these feelings again, but not acted upon them because they mean nothing. I was 14, I just didn't know how to handle it. I confused it with love. I got into a bad habit. I still worry about it now over a year later. It's hard to live with myself. This has ruined my life. I just don't want to be seen as a creepy stalker, but I sure feel like one. I can't even watch stalker movies or anything because I feel like that's who I was. It hurts so much and really messed me up, and being feared just feels like an eternal punishment. Another thing about this that twirls my mind into ruins is that she wasn't exactly an attractive woman. She looked as old as she was. This may sound narcissistic, so forgive me if it does, but I wasn't ugly, and as the years grew on without the situation and without the school, people often started to see me as a stunning or beautiful girl, like an evolution. It is irrelevant, but it also doesn't make any sense at all. I am in so much confusion. I wish I could meet someone else who had been through this too. But not even on here, no one's story seems as freaky as mine. Everyone gets a friendship with their teacher. If I never told Mrs. J, maybe we could have gotten along like we used to. Maybe if everyone on here did what I did, they would have got less and less. I ruined it for myself and it hurt. At my new school, the headmaster from my old school actually came up to me and said he still ponders over whether or not I was treated fairly, and that he was sorry, which is lovely to know someone cared. This is long, but without a doubt the most unexplainable creepy thing that's ever happened to me. June last year, a man from Pakistan began messaging me on Facebook. Assuming it was a scam account, I ignored his attempts at conversation and thought little of it. 6 months later, the random messages started to pop up again, several times a day, with personal information about me he couldn't possibly know. Every day for almost 4 months, the stranger wrote to me, knowing details about my life that I'm certain aren't on Facebook. He knew where I'd worked, where I lived, my phone number, the brand of smokes I buy, how I'd become unemployed, my parents separating, and my daily routine. I'm not easily spooked, but he was trying to get under my skin, and it was working. I told a few close friends who were skeptical at first, figuring he'd gotten my information off of Facebook, until they read the message thread for themselves and could see how serious it was. Of course, I considered the possibility an acquaintance of mine was behind the account posting as this man. Unfortunately, the timeline dated back to 2012, had hundreds of photos, check-ins with family and friends on the other side of the world, and appeared legitimate. He intimidated me for months, dropping facts about my life every now and then to scare the shit out of me. Finally, he explained he wanted to come to Australia, and if I helped him, he would pay me. At first, I was amused that he thought I could be of help, making a joke of his idea. He obviously didn't appreciate my response because he started mentioning my dad and sister. I was more angry than scared by that point and decided to contact the National Security Hotline. I figured if this individual was willing to pay a stranger on Facebook to worm his way into Australia, they'd want to find out why. They also didn't think I was batshit crazy, so that was a huge relief after all the looks others had given me. A few days passed after the call. The messages continued, but I had peace of mind knowing I'd reported it. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe I was batshit crazy. Or perhaps one of my friends was behind it all. Obviously, the authorities weren't taking the situation as lightly as I'd thought, because the detectives turned up at my home to get the story from myself firsthand. As bizarre as the situation was, it was comforting knowing that they had listened and had my best interest after being made to feel like an idiot for months. The messages stopped the same day I spoke to the detectives at my house, giving me reason to believe action was taken when they left. I'll probably never know the details, but it's probably best that way anyway. Anyway, not the usual creepy story you read in these threads, but I won't be forgetting my encounter anytime soon. Probably my entire life could count as a disturbing, scary story. My mother and grandmother were always extremely protective of me as a child. I grew up forbidden to visit family or friends, walk down the street, go outdoors by myself, or even cook or drive. It got worse and worse as I grew older. I mean, I was 19 and my mother forbade me from having a job. She told me that I had everything that I needed right there, with her. I didn't need money. I decided that enough was enough and saved up some money from doing laundry and finding change around the house, swiping what I could here and there, and I had to hide it well. She would steal it from me if she found it. She said that all the money was hers and hers alone. I packed my bags one day and tried to leave. She actually tackled me to the ground and dragged me back inside with my grandmother's help. Had my phone reported stolen and took it from me so that I couldn't make calls, and slept beside my bed to make sure that I didn't sneak away. She took me to a church meeting one day, holiness, and had the demons blessed out of me for 3 hours solid. No one would help me. She had them all convinced that I was nuts and needed help. She even recruited a cousin on my next attempt weeks later, when I actually got a bus ticket, to come and trick me into her car. Cousin told me that she was protecting me, helping me, but she wanted to talk to me first, shut the car door on me, and after I got in, it had a child safety lock on it. They drove me home and kept me isolated for a solid year before I could get help. Some of my relatives even parked their cars in the driveway for a while to keep me from leaving. I finally got away after I gained her trust back over time, got access to my phone again, and was able to get in contact with a guy that I knew. Really nice guy, who I was strictly forbidden from talking to. He was the devil. Seriously, she called him multiple times and told him that he was the devil and needed to be rebuked. He promised to help me get out. This was hard because she wouldn't even let me get an ID or anything, claiming that I'd use it to leave her. We couldn't contact the police. She once told them that she had papers somewhere that said I was in her custody and I was mentally insane, and they left me with her. Freaking Alabama. He, combined with a more trustworthy cousin, managed to help me save up some money in secret and sneak out to a waiting taxi one day in a grocery store. Guy and I flew to Idaho, where he had some family willing to help me, teach me how to drive and live on my own, and I haven't looked back since. Now I get daily calls, messages, and texts from my mother saying that I'm killing her and my grandmother, that they're dying without me. Funny thing is, I've seen pictures of her and she looks like she's lost half her body weight. She's a walking skeleton. Bonus, I found out later that she had access to nearly every account that I've made online for anything, and has been stalking me for years in secret, sometimes using my name. She's also tried multiple times since I left to get into my PayPal account, but it locks her out and sends me a message. I was going out with two of my guy friends one night, and we were planning to just walk to the bar. About a quarter of the way, we realized it was too cold and we should grab a cab. There was a cab sitting in the parking lot of the Royal Farms right there, so we went up and tapped on the window. The cabbie appeared to be taking a nap. He woke up, motioned for us to get in, so we did. He pulls out of the Royal Farms lot into the lane, with traffic going in the opposite direction that we were moving. Then he starts weaving back and forth throughout the lanes in an S pattern. Luckily, there was no traffic coming in the opposite direction. We asked for him to stop and we'd just get out there. I was in the middle seat. We came to a stop at a red light and the boys both hop out. As I started sliding over to get out, the cab driver took off, running the red light as I'm desperately trying to hold the door open with my foot. I figured that if that door closed, he'd lock it and I'd be locked in and his prisoner. I'm screaming my head off and still holding the door with my foot. The guys are running as fast as they can behind the cab while throwing whatever they can at it. He then decides to swing right and smashes into 8 cars that were parked along the side of the road. This was also the side where my leg was holding the door open. Luckily for me, there was another red light and a car stopped in front of us. I couldn't get the right door open, but was quick enough to get over and get out of the driver's side. As soon as I rolled out, the light changed and he took off. The guys were only able to get a very blurry picture of the tag, and we couldn't make out the numbers when we called 911. My leg was okay, just badly bruised, and I have no idea if they ever caught up with the guy. Hands down, scariest experience of my life. I didn't think I had anything really creepy to post about until I started reading through these and read something similar to an experience I had. It started around my sophomore year in high school. I began getting creepy text messages and phone calls, but never really thought much of them since in those days prank calls was a common thing to do. The messages and calls would come in constantly for weeks, then would stop after a while. I honestly would forget they had even happened until they'd start back up again. Around my junior year, the calls began getting creepier. They would call my house number along with my cell phone. This was around the time that cell phones were starting to get popular, so while some of my older friends still had my house phone number, it wasn't something I would give out to people anymore. When I started dating, they began calling my then boyfriend and would tell him awful things about me, and sometimes even know where I was at the time, and ask him to question my whereabouts. It caused a lot of issues between us, but again, they would stop after a while, and apart from wondering who it could be, I never thought much of them again. Fast forward to college. I stopped talking to a lot of my friends from high school, even deleted my old MySpace accounts, and cleared friends from Facebook because I wanted to have a fresh start. Was still dating the same guy, but really stopped having contact with most people I knew from high school. Halfway through my freshman year, The calls and text messages started again, this time with even more personal details about my life. Like always, right before I considered them serious enough to report, they would stop, and I would slowly forget they'd even happened. Sophomore year, I moved out of the dorms and into an apartment with 3 girls I'd met the year before. One night, I started getting the usual texts again, but this time they were threatening to Photoshop nude pictures of me to send out to people I knew. I tried ignoring them, but the text wouldn't stop. I would block one number and they would come in from a different number almost immediately. I got really creeped out and decided to change my number the next day. At this point, I was not sure who it could be, but I had become paranoid and stopped trusting anyone except my boyfriend. I isolated myself from friends and began going into a depression. I sometimes was sure it was so-and-so from high school, but could never come up with proof of anything. Fast forward a few months and I'm at a concert with my boyfriend. He got drunk that night and we'd gotten into a huge fight over it. I was home with my parents that weekend and got home around midnight. Around 2 a.m., the calls to my house phone started coming in. Yes, we still had a landline. One after another, we were getting calls from men asking for my sexual services. We tried blocking calls, but like before, it was just different numbers one after another. Finally, we just unplugged the phone. The next morning, I had to explain to my parents what had been going on for years, and together we made a report and changed our landline number. Turns out someone had put my phone number on Craigslist and listed me as a prostitute. By now, I began realizing that my boyfriend had been the one constant during most of these incidents, and that our drunk fight that night could not have been a coincidence with my number being posted on Craigslist. It took a few tries for me to leave the relationship. He was very manipulative and I spent years isolating myself from friendships and trusting only him. I finally left him that summer and chose to forget all these things that ever happened. It took me a while to be healthy enough to start dating again, but when I did, I met a wonderful guy who is now my husband. I mentioned what had happened to me before, but thankfully was emotionally distant enough from it that we just commented on how awful that had been and moved on. Last year, however, I began getting text messages again. I had a new phone, new number, new friend circle, blocked anyone associated with my ex-boyfriend, trusted the people in my life not to hand out my number to anyone, so I was so scared when it started again. Thankfully, this time I had my wonderful husband with me. After it happened a few times where I would get text messages only when I was with my husband, and the text messages insinuated that I had been cheating on him, we decided that we weren't going to take the chance that this was a coincidence. We hoped that we weren't being followed, but the timing and content of the messages were obviously meant to cause a fight between my husband and I. We decided to make another police report, this time citing my ex-boyfriend as the suspect, and limited the number of people who had my number even further. Since then, I'm so happy to say that I have not gotten any unknown calls or messages. The detective assigned to my case attempted to contact my ex-boyfriend, but he was never able to. In any case, I think that he realized that this time I was serious about pursuing legal action against him and he stopped. I was lucky that this was the case because technically, I did not have any proof that it had been him. Anonymous harassment is actually really difficult to pursue legally for many reasons, so thankfully approaching him was enough to make it stop. When I think about this experience now, I realize how disturbed and manipulative that guy really was. I have no proof that the prank calls I got before I met him were him, but if I think about how I met him, it all looks so planned to me now, even though then it seemed like a Nicholas Spark movie. I hope that those calls were coincidence, but I'll really never know how far this guy went with his stalking of me. I'm just glad to be out of that relationship and to be emotionally healthy again. I'm always late to these threads, but I've got a good one that incorporates the true monsters around us. A couple of years ago, my boyfriend and I went on an impromptu road trip. We packed up the car and the dogs and drove up to far northern California redwoods. I was somewhat familiar with the area from the time I was a kid, and it seemed very adventurous just heading out without a true destination in mind. A couple of nights in, we ended up meeting up with a friend of a friend, grabbing some drinks, and she invited us to crash at her house for the night. We happily took her up on the offer because it saved us from dropping money on a motel or trying to find a camping spot. She lived in a super cool looking old Victorian house. Our friend normally had 6 roommates, including several guys, but since it was summertime and most of them were students, it was only her and another female roommate, plus us, for the night. We drank some beers and hung out and went to crash. Both roommates were upstairs, and my boyfriend and I with our dogs were crashing on a futon downstairs in a room that was right in the front of the house off the front door. It was kind of a sitting room with a fireplace and big bay windows looking out to the front yard, which had a good cover of bushes. We both fell asleep easily and were in deep sleep until we were suddenly awakened by the doorbell ringing. Now, this is an old Victorian, so it has an old-school, deep-ringing doorbell that you hear throughout the house. One of the residents of the house came down and opened the door and looked out and saw nothing. So she went back upstairs to bed. My boyfriend and I thought it was kind of weird, but not our house. Maybe late-night visitors were common. We fell back asleep and then were awakened again some time later by the doorbell. We heard the roommate come down again and look outside the door and shut it. This time, she walked into our room after and asked if we heard the doorbell, and we could tell she was weirded out. We told her not to open the door if it happens again, and all came to the conclusion that it must be the doorbell malfunctioning or something. The roommate goes back upstairs and we fell back asleep. Next, I wake up to one of my dogs growling the most deep-throated growl I have ever heard from him. He absolutely loves people, even if they are strangers, and we live in the downtown of a pretty major city, so having him growl at something at night is not normal. We chalk it up to being in an unfamiliar house and tell him to be quiet. I fell asleep again. Next thing I know, I wake up with my boyfriend jumping out of bed and literally smacking the big bay window about 5 feet away from my bed and yelling. There's a man's face standing in the window staring at us. My boyfriend immediately grabbed an axe, since we had been camping, it was right at hand, and chased this guy down the street. I'm sure whoever that creep was must have shit his pants. The whole commotion woke everyone up and we stayed up the rest of the night keeping guard. The scariest thing to me is that the guy was probably casing the house. If he wanted to rob it, there's no reason for him to ring the doorbell multiple times. He wanted to see if it was only the girl's home, depending on who came to the door. Still gives me chills to this day to think about it. I was about 12 or 13 years old when this happened. One time, I was walking to my psychiatrist's for my weekly appointment. It's a half-hour walk and after dark. I enjoyed walking, especially after dark when things were quiet, peaceful, and slow, and no one else was around. No, I didn't live in a dangerous neighborhood, nor did I walk through one to get to my psychiatrist's. As I'm about halfway to my destination, a car, a Cadillac, comes driving down the street. Some people, both male and female, in the car are sticking themselves out of the windows and are taunting and jeering at me. A bunch of people in their late teens or early 20s. I ignore them and keep walking. About a minute or two later, the same car comes down the street again, and those people are taunting me yet again. I don't know who they are. Maybe they live in the neighborhood. I still ignore them and keep walking. Another minute or so goes by again. They come driving down the street. Now I'm worried. They're circling the block over and over, deliberately focusing on me. As soon as they reach the corner and make their turn and are out of sight, I duck behind some bushes in someone's front yard and wait. The car comes again down the street. They pass right by me in my hiding place and turn the corner. I think they think I've finally reached my destination, one of the houses on the block, and as a result, they drove away. I thought wrong. Stupidly, I leave my hiding place and go back to walking on my way to the psychiatrist's. I should have stayed there behind the bushes much longer because I hear the car approaching. They spot me and start taunting me again. They turn the corner. This time I run towards my destination, but I know I won't get far before the car and those kids catch up with me again. So I decided to hide again behind the bushes in front of an apartment building. This time resolving to stay there for a good while until the thugs in the car give up on searching for me. I'm hiding there behind the bushes for about 30 seconds or so when the guy whose apartment it is pops out, asking what I'm doing hiding in his bushes. At first, he probably thinks I'm a burglar or something, but I explained to him how I'm walking to my psychiatrist's and how I'm being followed and harassed by a bunch of kids in a car, which is why I'm hiding in his bushes. The guy can instantly tell from the tone of voice and my facial expressions that I'm telling the truth. He can see how scared I am. Just then, the car comes down the street and pulls right up at the curb directly in front of us. They look at me and the guy I'm with. Not a mean-looking guy, in his late 30s, early 40s, but tough and serious looking. He's wearing a sleeveless shirt, which reveals that this guy's upper body is very well toned, slightly muscular. I'm looking at the car and I realize that it's missing a few people inside. The car doesn't look full now. The guy I'm with just gives them a mean stare. He asks me, "You know them?" I explain that no, I don't know them at all. I haven't the slightest idea of who they are. Just then, as the car is sitting there, about 3 of them approach, walking from the other direction. The car was traveling east to west. Those 3 were walking on foot from west to east, so that's why the car seemed emptier. They were looking to escalate the situation. They weren't satisfied with just driving by and taunting me. They changed tactics. A few of them got out of the car up ahead and started walking towards me, while the ones in the car took another turn and around the block. Their plan now was to physically trap me in between them and their car, perhaps grab me and drag me into the car with them for whatever reason. But seeing my tough guy guardian angel with me, the kids walking towards the car instead got into the car and took off. The guy offered to stay with me for a little while longer, or if I wanted to duck into his apartment to stay there until I was sure that it was safe to continue my journey. I had a feeling that this was the last I was going to see of those guys and their car, and I didn't want to be late for my appointment. So I thanked the guy for his offer, but declined, and decided to head on my way. The guy went back into his apartment and closed the door. I looked at the closed door and hoped that I hadn't made a mistake by turning down the guy's offer, because I was still scared. Thankfully, I was right about not seeing the car again. The rest of my walk was peaceful. I reached the psychiatrist's office. I told my therapist about what had happened. He insisted on calling the police. The police came and took a report from me. That's the last I heard of it. On my way back home, I usually took the same route that I came from, up the same streets. But this evening, I changed my route, taking some different side streets. I never saw the car or those thugs again. I came home late one night when I was about 17 and the rest of my family was already in bed. I go to my room and just do typical stuff before bed. Work on my homework, talk to my friends on the phone, listen to music. Finally, go to bed a couple of hours later and nod off. I'm awoken by some rustling under my bed, but assume it is my cat and just roll over and go back to sleep. A short while later, I'm woken up again. I laid there perfectly still and quiet and listened to the noises. This was when I realized that the noise was coming from an animal much larger than any damn cat. Since I lived near the woods, my imagination started running wild. Was it a rabid raccoon? A sinister skunk? A crazed coyote? It took me about 5 minutes to work up the courage to peek under the bed and try to figure out what I was dealing with. I slowly rolled over and glanced down the small gap between my mattress and my bed frame and saw the scariest thing I've ever seen. It was a hair-covered arm of a man. My heart started racing and I felt like either vomiting or pooping my pants. I knew I needed to run, but all I kept thinking of was that this diabolical murderer/rapist was going to slash my Achilles tendon as soon as I stood up and my ankles were within reach. I finally gathered the courage to leap from the bed and make a dash toward the door. This is when I realized that it was actually possible to be so terrified that no noise comes out when you scream. I made it to the door and was running from the stairs up to my parents' room when I was grabbed from behind and a hand clamped over my mouth. Long story short, once the guy started whispering for me to be quiet, I realized I knew who it was. It was a guy I'd been on a few dates with. He was trying to apologize for scaring me and said he didn't mean to, and that he just wanted to see what I was like when alone. Hysterical me started crying and telling him to get the fuck out of my house. Dude had the nerve to ask me to give him a ride home. No? A couple lessons learned. My parents sleep like the dead and do not wake up even when their child is near murdered in the basement. Sneaking into a girl's house and hiding under a girl's bed is not an acceptable way to learn more about her. Also, I may be too nice and understanding. In hindsight, I think I should have called the cops on this guy, but instead just told him to leave me alone and not talk to me anymore, because my parents told me that he seemed like a nice boy who just made a bad judgment call. However, this incident still haunts me years later. It seemed really scary to me. Let me start out with a bit of background information. At the time this occurred, I was in nursing school and struggling to get by. My dad killed himself when I was little and my mom turned to alcohol after that, so I didn't get much help there. But I was determined to get my degree and have a stable life for myself. I lived in a crappy ghetto apartment in the scary part of town. I'm talking gunshots at least once a week, needles on the sidewalk, just trashy. The random hours required for clinicals made it hard to hold down a good job. Plus, I didn't have any transportation besides my bike, which was on its last leg. Long story short, I was having a very hard time and looking for any way to make some money. Cue Jane. She was a good friend of mine whom I'd known since freshman year. She noticed my situation and told me how she was making $200 plus a night at a local strip club. This got my attention as that was a lot of money to me. She said the club had a no-touching policy and guys literally threw money at you. I made the decision to go with her that night and check it out. I was graduating in less than a year anyway, why not? Jane stayed by my side the entire night. I felt safe, no one touched me, no one harassed me, and I made over $300. I was ecstatic. The best part was I chose my own hours so I could make sure work didn't interfere with school. We went a few more times together before she left to visit her family for spring break. She left me explicit instructions that if I decided to go to work, I was to take a cab. I actually had the money for one now. Call her when I left for work. Call her when I got there. Text her every hour and call her when I was leaving. This seemed overkill to me, but I agreed. I finished all my classwork early one night and I thought, since it was spring break in a big city, I could probably earn a few extra $100. I called a cab, called Jane, and went to work. Everything was normal, I was doing great and making more than I ever had. Then I was approached by a girl who I had seen there before. She introduced herself as Asia, but none of us went by our real names. She talked to me for a bit and asked where I live. This set off tiny alarm bells, but I figured she was just being friendly and named off another shitty apartment complex near mine. She told me she was looking for a chill roommate and would I be interested. I obviously was taken aback, but I was dying to get out of my scary place. I asked how much the rent was and she said the guy who owned the duplex wasn't charging students as long as they were working. This should have set off more alarms since I didn't tell Asia I was a student, but I completely missed that at the time. I was a little cautious but definitely interested. She told me she would take me by the place when the club closed so I could see it and then take me home. I thought there was no harm in looking. I called Jane and told her about the situation. She became very quiet and asked what the girl's name was. I told her and she responded saying I needed to call a cab and get back home now. I was pissed that she was ruining this for me, until she explained Asia was a known prostitute. Long story short, yeah, I would have gotten to live there, but as a sex slave. She didn't want me for her roommate, she wanted to bring me back to her pimp. I called a cab and hid in the back until it got there. I heard Asia looking for me, but I didn't come out. As soon as I got the text that the cab was there, I ran out the back door and sprinted to it. I looked back to see the commotion had caused Asia, who was still looking for me, and a large man to turn in that direction. I never worked there again and graduated a few months later. I now live in a good apartment with a great job at the ER, but I shudder to think what would have happened that night. A few summers ago, I was working as a front desk receptionist at a popular downtown salon. On slower evenings after the stylists finished their appointment schedule, I was occasionally left alone to book treatments and sell products until the salon closed. At this point, you're likely thinking that some creep came in one evening when I was alone to do what creeps do, but I'm not the victim in this story. With that being said, one evening when I was alone, a young man came in to schedule an appointment for his girl. He told me that he wanted her hair colored every shade of red you got. I asked him what level of stylist he wanted, i.e. how much money did he want to spend, and he said it didn't matter, he just wanted the next available appointment, which was several days later and on my day off. He scheduled the appointment under her name, which I won't use, but know is a very generic sounding name. When I returned to work, I was playing around on the computer used for appointments and I suddenly remembered the appointment I had made for that man's girl. I wonder if they had kept it. They had not. The appointment was marked as a no-show. I checked not because I felt this man was being creepy, but because I was being judgmental. This young man appeared to not have a lot of money and the color appointment would have been expensive. Judgment confirmed and I didn't think about it again. About 3 weeks later, I'm standing at the front desk and the same man walks in with a very young girl. At the time, I guessed that she was about 15 and he was in his late 20s. I glanced down at the name and the next appointment, and it was not the same name the man had previously given me, but it was an equally forgettable name. He approached me and sure enough, he was checking her in for a color appointment. I suddenly went from judgment to full-on suspicion, but this girl did not seem scared or uncomfortable at all. In fact, she seemed very sweet and a bit dreamy. Think Luna Lovegood in the Harry Potter series. And he was perfectly pleasant, just as he'd been before. I checked the young girl in and alerted the stylist that her appointment had arrived. I knew the color was going to take a good 2.5 hours, but the man stayed the entire time. Most of the time he just messed with his phone and ignored everything and everyone around him. At some point, our youngest receptionist, 16, came on for her shift. I don't remember noting if the man noticed her. It just seems like suddenly he was at the other end of the counter talking to her. I couldn't hear what was said, but the body language and facial expressions indicated a confident man flirting with a young girl who was shy, but pleased with the attention she was receiving. Having once been a shy 16-year-old girl myself, I was 23 then, my red flags and alarm bells were marching in a parade all around me. When the stylist who was coloring the young girl's hair went to the back office, I followed. "So what kind of color are you doing?" The stylist rolled her eyes and said, "I'm coloring that girl's hair about 1,000,000 shades of red. So tacky." Cue the master of ceremonies, because this parade of red flags had just reached the zenith. "Yeah, she'll regret that, but she seems like a nice kid." The stylist shrugged and said, "She's kinda weird. Can hardly answer a simple question." "What do you mean?" "I don't know. She's just really airheaded, like she doesn't even realize what's going on." Okay, I'm very uncomfortable with all of this. But what the hell do I do? Call the police and say what? So I did the goddamn wrong thing. I watched them leave without saying a word. Her color cost $300, and he paid for it by taking out a huge cash roll and handing me 20s. "Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day." "Yeah, you too." During this time, I was working at the salon and at a restaurant in a city that was 15 minutes from my apartment. The drive was all freeway and I knew it well. The landscapes, gas stations, and mile marker signs tended to blend, so when I passed a billboard that I had passed so many times before, it shocked me when I actually processed what it said. Report human trafficking. And I knew that's exactly what that slimy motherfucker was doing with these young girls. I called the number and told my story. I expected bored derision from the woman at the other end. I was going on a gut feeling after all. Nope. The woman was friendly and professional and assured me it would be looked into. "All right. Treble, you were a complacent chicken shit the first time, but you did the right thing today. Let's hope someone helps that poor girl. Oh, and don't forget to speak with your young, naive coworker about that man." 2 days later, I'm back at the salon when 3 big men walk in. Alarm number 1, their clothing was baggy and dirty. They looked rough. Alarm number 2. 2 remained by the front door, attempting and failing to be aloof, while the biggest one walked straight towards me. "Is Trouble here today?" "Why?" "I need to speak with her." "She can't have visitors at work and I'm not able to give out her schedule." Deep sigh, and then a badge hanging from a chain on his neck slips out from under his t-shirt. "I'm Officer So-and-so with the Anytown Police Department and I need to speak with her now." "I'm her. Let's go to the office." I proceed to tell and retell my story and answer a ton of questions. The officer also speaks with the stylist and my young coworker. I gave him the phone number that the man left for each appointment he made. They were different. And then the 3 undercover officers left. It's over. They took me seriously and they'll catch that piece of shit. But they're back the next day, along with a man who's in plain clothes but openly wearing his badge. The same officer walks up to the counter and shows me a piece of paper. "Is this her?" he asks. I don't really know what I'm looking at except to say that it's an advertisement of some sort. It's 2 black and white pictures of a young girl in nothing but a thong and text that is covered by the officer's hand. Also, I'm not sure if it's her. The girl in this picture looks very similar but a lot heavier. I tell the officer this and he says impatiently, "Well, what if she lost weight?" "Yeah, I guess it could be her." Then Officer So-and-so and his new guy follow me back to the office and ask me a few more questions. I'm able to ask the officer if they've located her and he tells me that they have. He goes so far as to tell me that the undercover officers are headed to a hotel scene at that very moment. I said, "That's great," or something like that. The officer then decides to ask me why I called the tip line, and I told him that the whole thing just didn't seem right. He made some joke about offering me a job because they needed more people who acted on instinct. So, movie-like, right? And he then said that as soon as the sting was over, he was going to make sure I was given proper recognition. Joy turned to fear, and I was suddenly deep into my first realization that some cops are idiots who can't be trusted, and that I, too, am an idiot. What? No. I don't want recognition. I just want to stay anonymous. That's too bad, because you deserve to be rewarded. No. And another realization that this officer has my full name, phone number, and place of employment written down in his stupid little notebook. What happens to your notes? I asked him. Officer Fuckface responds with, "Don't worry, I've been doing this a long time and I've never lost an informant." What the fuck does that even mean? This is not an episode of the goddamn Sopranos. R.I.P. Mr. Gandolfini. I'm not an informant. I'm some dumbass who called an anonymous tip line. Officer Jackass has to leave, but then the badge man stays. Oh, I didn't mention who he was. Special Agent Go Fuck Yourself with the Attorney General's office. And guess what? He's proud of me. He wishes more people cared like I do. He also has my phone number. What happens next is obvious. I get mono and I'm begging the gods above to let me die in the intermittent sleep. And then I get a phone call from my salon manager. Trouble? There's 2 TV news crews here, and some newspaper reporters too. We're playing dumb, but maybe it's a good thing you got sick. Do they know my name? I ask. No, I put in numerous calls to the officer and special agent and received no response, but I thought they were proud of me. The officer had given me 2 numbers, one to an office and one to a cell phone. After 2 days, the cell phone number no longer worked. It had been answered once by a woman who promptly hung up on me, and the officer was never available when I called. The special agent returned my call some days later. Finally, he wanted a written statement. Go fuck yourself. He couldn't understand why I was being so uncooperative. Go fuck yourself. Finally, he threatened me with a subpoena. You want to subpoena someone who called an anonymous tip line? Go fuck yourself. He called me a few more times, but I didn't answer. Ultimately, I had to drag my sick ass to my favorite professor's office because he also happened to be a badass attorney. I felt incredibly uncomfortable asking for his advice. I felt I was definitely crossing a line, but I was desperate and very, very scared. I had now seen this story all over the news along with the words, "an employee at a local business." Long story short, Professor Awesome helped me. Special Agent Go Fuck Yourself stopped calling. The man was arrested and charged with a number of things, including human trafficking, but he was released, and I don't know what happened after that. I'm not scared anymore, but I was looking over my shoulder the entire summer.